You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. When we examine the legal ordeals surrounding R. Kelly, one of the most troubling aspects of the prosecution's case lies in how the government and the courts handled the statute of limitations amendment passed by Congress in 2003. At the heart of this issue is a legal principle so fundamental and so basic that it should never have been misapplied. And yet in Kelly's case, it was not only misapplied, but upheld at the appellate level even after his attorney Jennifer Bonjean clearly laid out why the government's interpretation was wrong. This is not a minor technical detail. This is a bedrock rule of American law. The question is simple: can Congress pass a law in 2003 and have it retroactively change the statute of limitations for alleged conduct that happened years before? Can you alter the rules of the game after the fact and then use that altered rule to punish someone? The answer, as Bonjean argued, is absolutely not. And Congress itself made sure of that when it debated this very amendment. Let's break this down carefully. The statute of limitations sets the maximum amount of time that legal proceedings may be initiated after an alleged offense. It exists for good reason, to protect defendants from facing charges decades after the fact when memories fade, evidence disappears and witnesses may no longer be available. It's about fairness and due process. Without these limits, prosecutors could drag up accusations from the distant past, leaving defendants unable to properly defend themselves. In 2003, Congress passed an amendment that extended the statute of limitations for certain sex crimes. The government, during its pursuit of R. Kelly, argued that this amendment allowed them to reach back into the 1990s, pulling events from many years before the law was even enacted, and prosecute him as if the clock had never run out. This interpretation is what made much of their case even possible. Without applying the law retroactively, many of the charges simply would not have been allowed to proceed. But here's the critical point: the original draft of the 2003 amendment bill actually attempted to do just that. It attempted to apply retroactively to crimes that had already passed the statute of limitations. And do you know what happened? That version of the bill was rejected. It was struck down. Meaning Congress considered the idea, but they intentionally left it out. This is undeniable proof that Congress never intended for the amendment to work backwards. R. Kelly's attorney highlighted this in painstaking detail during the Chicago appeal hearings. She walked the appellate judges through the legislative history, showing them how Congress itself debated the issue and chose not to apply the law retroactively. She reminded them that the Constitution strongly disfavors retroactive criminal laws, especially when it comes to extending limitations periods after the fact. She pointed out that if lawmakers had wanted it to be retroactive, they would have written it that way. But they didn't. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't creative lawyering. This was the plain legislative record. And yet, despite such a clear and well-supported explanation, the appellate judges still chose to uphold the trial court's decision. They accepted the government's interpretation, which allowed the 2003 amendment to reach backwards in time and resurrect charges that otherwise would have been dead. Think about how disturbing that is. We are not talking about a gray area here. We're talking about a law that Congress deliberately crafted to apply only going forward. The judiciary's role is to respect both the Constitution and legislative intent. But in R. Kelly's case, that role was abandoned. The judges acted as though Congress's decision to strike retroactivity from the bill never happened. It's almost surreal. Imagine a referee in a basketball game deciding that the three-point line now counts as 4 points, and not only for future plays, but for shots made years ago in entirely different games. That's exactly what the court did to R. Kelly. They changed the rules after the fact and used those new rules against him. Jennifer Bonjean's argument wasn't just about legislative history. It was also about constitutional principles. The ex post facto clause of the Constitution prohibits retroactive criminal punishment. The government cannot increase penalties or revive expired prosecutions by passing a new law. This is settled doctrine reaffirmed time and time again by the Supreme Court. By upholding the retroactive application of the 2003 amendment, the appellate court essentially ignored this constitutional safeguard. It raises the question, why would judges who know the law and understand its limits allow this to stand? Why would they turn a blind eye to such a blatant misinterpretation? Bonjean in her arguments made it clear that the government's reading of the law was not only wrong but dangerous. If allowed to stand, it sets a precedent that Congress can quietly extend or change statutes of limitations, and courts can then apply them backwards, reviving long-dead cases against any defendant they choose. That's not how the law is supposed to work. That's exactly how political witch hunts are carried out. And make no mistake, this wasn't a small technical detail that only matters to lawyers. This was a pillar of the government's case against R. Kelly. Without this retroactive application, much of what they charged him with would have been time-barred. It should never have been brought before a jury. The Constitution should have protected him from facing charges decades after the alleged conduct when the statute had already run. But instead of recognizing this, the appellate judges doubled down on the trial court's flawed reasoning. They knew the legislative history. They knew Congress had rejected retroactivity. They knew Bonjean was right. And still they upheld the government's retroactive use of the 2003 amendment. Let's pause here and reflect. What does this tell us about the fairness of Kelly's trials? What does it tell us about the willingness of the judiciary to bend rules when the defendant is someone unpopular, someone painted as guilty in the media before ever stepping into a courtroom? The law is supposed to be blind. But in this case, it seems the judges put on a blindfold only to the defense's arguments while keeping their eyes wide open to anything that could uphold the government's case. The irony is staggering. Congress itself protected defendants from retroactive application of this statute. And yet the courts whose job is to uphold both the Constitution and Congress's intent decided to ignore it. That is not justice. That is a distortion of justice. R. Kelly's appellate team argued this point with clarity and evidence. They demonstrated how the government twisted the amendment's meaning to secure convictions. They showed that Congress considered, debated and ultimately rejected retroactivity. They laid out constitutional principles that forbid applying the amendment backwards. And still the judges sided with the prosecution. This kind of decision undermines the credibility of the entire justice system. If legislative history and constitutional protections can be brushed aside in the name of securing a conviction, then no defendant is truly safe. The statutes of limitations become meaningless. The ex post facto clause becomes irrelevant. And trials become less about law and more about outcomes the government wants to see. R. Kelly's case exposes this danger in the clearest possible way. The government's ploy depended on rewriting history. Pretending that a 2003 law could magically apply to alleged acts that happened long before it was passed. Bonjean showed why this was wrong. Congress's rejection of retroactivity proved her right. But the courts didn't care. And that is the tragedy of this appeal. When appellate judges are confronted with such a glaring error, their duty is to correct it. That's why appeals exist. Defendants bring cases before higher courts to have errors reviewed, to ensure justice was properly done. But when even appellate judges disregard clear legislative intent and constitutional limits, the entire system collapses under its own contradictions. R. Kelly deserved a fair trial under the law as written, not under laws rewritten in hindsight. He deserved protection from retroactive application of statutes, just like any other citizens. He deserved judges who would respect Congress's decision and the Constitution's safeguards. Instead, he got a judiciary willing to stretch and bend the law to make sure his conviction stood. That is why Jennifer Bonjean's arguments remain so important. They reveal not only the flaws in the government's case but also the failures of the judiciary. They remind us that even when the truth is laid bare, even when the legislative record is clear, justice can still be denied. And so as we reflect on this part of R. Kelly's appeals, we are left with a troubling question: if the law itself cannot protect someone in his position, then what hope is there for anyone else? That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say. To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.